The aluminum boat rose from the depths like a silver coffin, its hull scarred by 3 years of lake-bottom silence, and inside sat 2 perfectly preserved figures. But only one of them was supposed to be there. Marine recovery specialist Elena Vasquez had pulled dozens of vessels from Lake Tahoe's depths, but nothing had prepared her for the sight that greeted her through her diving mask that October morning. The missing Hartwell boat, registration number clearly visible despite the algae, contained 2 bodies. Marcus Hartwell, 45, slumped over the steering wheel exactly as expected, and his 12-year-old son Danny seated beside him. But the police reports Elena had studied showed that Danny Hartwell had been found alive 3 years ago, wandering Highway 89 12 miles from the lake, claiming he couldn't remember what happened to his father. The boy in the boat wore the same blue windbreaker Danny had described losing in the water. His face, preserved by the lake's frigid depths, showed no signs of drowning, just a strange, peaceful expression that made Elena's blood run cold. Marcus Hartwell had been desperate to reconnect with his son. The divorce from Sarah had been brutal, leaving him with weekend visitations and a guilt that gnawed at him like a physical hunger. Danny, once his fishing buddy and camping companion, had grown distant and sullen at 12, more interested in his phone than their traditional father-son outing. "Come on, kiddo," Marcus had pleaded that Friday evening, standing in Sarah's pristine doorway while his ex-wife watched from the kitchen, arms crossed. "Just like old times. Remember how we used to catch those rainbow trout at dawn?" Danny had looked up from his video game, brown eyes, so much like Marcus's own, filled with reluctance, but something in his father's voice, perhaps the barely concealed desperation, made him nod. Sarah had been against it. "The weather report shows storms moving in," she'd argued, her lawyer's instincts always calculating risk. "And Marcus, you've been drinking more lately. Don't think I haven't noticed." Marcus had wanted to deny it, but the empty bottles hidden in his apartment's closet testified against him. The job at the accounting firm was suffocating him, the loneliness eating away at his resolve each night. But this trip, this one perfect weekend, would fix everything. Elena's sister Carmen worked the missing persons desk at the sheriff's department, and she'd been the one to share the case details that had haunted Elena ever since the initial search. Danny had emerged from the wilderness looking like he'd been walking for hours, his clothes dry despite the storm that had raged over the lake. He claimed to remember leaving with his father, remembered the boat ride, but everything after that was a blank void. "I was in the water," he'd told the child psychologist, his voice eerily flat. "Then I was walking on the road. Dad was calling my name, but I couldn't find him." The search teams had combed the lake for weeks. Divers, sonar equipment, helicopters, nothing. Marcus Hartwell and his boat had simply vanished, leaving behind only a traumatized boy and a mystery that grew colder each passing day. Elena's headlamp cut through the murky water as she descended toward the anomaly her sonar had detected. At 200 feet down, the lake became a different world. Silent, pressurized, and unforgiving. When the boat's outline materialized in her light beam, her heart hammered against her wetsuit. The vessel sat upright on a rocky ledge, as if it had been carefully placed rather than sunk. No damage to the hull, no signs of collision or storm damage. Through the windscreen, she could see Marcus clearly, head tilted back, mouth open in what might have been a scream or a gasp for air. But it was Danny's presence that made her question everything she thought she knew about the case. The boy sat perfectly upright, hands folded in his lap, that strange, peaceful expression on his face. His lips were curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile. Elena's underwater camera captured everything, but when she tried to open the boat's cabin, her heart nearly stopped. Scattered across the floor were dozens of photographs. Pictures of Danny at various ages, but also photos of other children Elena didn't recognize. All boys, all around 12 years old. All with that same peaceful expression she'd seen on Danny's face. At the bottom of the pile was a handwritten note in Marcus's familiar scrawl. "He's not my son anymore. Something took him from me long before we got to the lake." Detective Ray Morrison had reopened the case immediately after Elena's discovery. 3 years of assuming Danny Hartwell was a traumatized survivor had crumbled in an instant. The boy who'd been living with his mother, attending therapy, going to school, who was he? The interview room smelled like disinfectant and fear when Morrison sat across from the teenager who called himself Danny Hartwell. At 15, he'd grown taller, his voice deeper, but those brown eyes remained unchanged, flat, emotionless, studying Morrison with an unsettling intensity. "You want to know about the lake," Danny said before Morrison could speak. His voice carried no trace of anxiety, no confusion about why he'd been brought in. "You found them. Who are they, Danny?" Morrison kept his voice steady, but his hand rested near his service weapon, an instinct he couldn't explain. "Marcus Hartwell was my father," Danny replied, each word carefully measured. "But I stopped being his son a long time before that night." Morrison leaned forward. "What happened on the lake?" For the first time, Danny's expression shifted, not to fear or sadness, but to something that might have been satisfaction. He finally understood. Some things that go into the water don't come back the same. The recording equipment captured every word, but when Morrison played it back later, Danny's voice seemed to echo with harmonics that shouldn't have been possible, as if multiple voices were speaking in perfect unison. Sarah Hartwell, now Sarah Morrison, having remarried, sat in her living room surrounded by the photographs Elena had recovered from the boat. Each image showed a different boy, but they all shared that same peaceful expression, that same unsettling smile. "I knew something was wrong," she whispered, her hands shaking as she turned over another photo. After he came back from the lake, Danny was different. He never cried about his father being gone, never asked questions. It was like he'd simply accepted it. Elena studied Sarah's face, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the way she flinched every time footsteps echoed from upstairs, where Danny was supposedly doing homework. "There were other things too," Sarah continued. "I'd find him standing by the window at night, just staring at the lake. We live 15 miles away, but somehow he always knew which direction it was. And the drawings?" She produced a sketchbook filled with charcoal renderings of children underwater, their faces peaceful, their eyes open and staring. At the bottom of each page, in Danny's careful handwriting, were names. Michael Chen, age 12, Lake George. Timothy Walsh, age 11, Lake Superior. Jesus Morales, age 12, Lake Powell. 27 names in total. 27 boys who'd gone missing near various lakes across the country over the past decade. Elena's follow-up dive revealed more than she'd bargained for. The rocky ledge where Marcus's boat rested wasn't natural. It was part of a larger structure, something that extended deep beneath the lake bed. Her sonar painted impossible images, geometric patterns, chambers, passages that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. In her dive log she wrote, "The boat wasn't placed on the ledge. The ledge rose to meet it," but it was her final discovery that made her question everything she thought she knew about Lake Tahoe. In a crevice beneath the boat, preserved in the frigid water, she found Marcus Hartwell's phone. Somehow, impossibly, it still functioned when she brought it to the surface. The last video file was time-stamped 3 years ago, the night of the disappearance. Through grainy footage, she watched Marcus and Danny on the boat, Danny seeming normal, excited about their fishing trip. But as the recording progressed, something changed in the boy's demeanor. His movements became more fluid, more precise. His voice, when he spoke, carried that same strange harmonic quality Morrison had noticed in the interview. "Dad," the boy said, turning to face the camera with those peaceful, empty eyes. "It's time to go home." The video cut to black, but the audio continued for another 30 seconds, Marcus screaming, the sound of water, and underneath it all, a sound Elena could only describe as singing. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, harmonizing in a language that made her teeth ache. Danny Hartwell disappeared from his mother's house on a Tuesday night in November, 3 weeks after Elena's discovery. Sarah found his bedroom window open, the screen carefully removed and placed on the floor. No signs of struggle, no indication of where he'd gone, but Elena knew. She'd been monitoring the lake since her discovery, and her equipment registered the disturbance the moment it began. The water temperature spiked by 15 degrees in a perfect circle around the coordinates where she'd found the boat. Her underwater cameras captured movement. Shapes, ascending from the depths, too uniform to be fish, too purposeful to be debris. She counted them as they rose. 28 figures, all children, all moving with that same fluid grace. At their center swam Danny, no longer needing to breathe, his eyes reflecting her camera lights like mirrors. The last image her equipment recorded before the cameras went dark showed all 28 children standing on the lake's surface, water supporting them as if it were solid ground. They were looking directly at her remote cameras, and their mouths were open in unison, singing that same impossible harmony. Detective Morrison closed the Hartwell case as death by misadventure. though the phrase tasted like ash in his mouth. Marcus Hartwell had drowned in his boat, overcome by a sudden storm. The body they'd found wasn't Danny. The DNA tests, run 3 times, confirmed it belonged to a boy named Michael Chen, who'd gone missing from Lake George 8 years earlier. But Morrison knew the truth went deeper than any official report could capture. Elena's footage, the photographs, the impossible harmonics recorded in that interview room, they all pointed to something that existed in the spaces between rational explanation and nightmare. Sarah moved across the country, changing her name, starting over, but she still dreams of that peaceful smile, of footsteps on the stairs that stop just outside her door. In her new apartment's bathroom mirror, sometimes she catches glimpses of water stains that look almost like handprints. Elena continues her recovery work, but she no longer dives alone. And every night, she checks the monitors she's placed throughout Lake Tahoe, watching for signs of movement in the depths. The water calls to her now, whispers promises of peace and understanding, of joining a harmony that stretches across every lake, every body of water deep enough to hold secrets. 28 children sleep beneath the surface, but the count keeps growing, and somewhere in the darkness between water and dream, Danny Hartwell tends to his collection, adding new voices to the chorus, preparing for the day when the song becomes loud enough for everyone to hear. The lake remembers everything it takes, and sometimes it gives back more than it received.